Hi everybody and welcome to Adobe Live. We'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we are creating and streaming from today and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. My name's Flynn and I'm here with Tim Northey, aka TK North. Hey TK, how are you?
Hey everyone, I'm good, going well. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Thanks
good.
for joining us everybody. So if you missed part one, that was on Tuesday, you can jump back through there. We were tackling photography. So getting started in photography, if you're new, if you want a bit of a refresher, interested in like expanding on your hobby, maybe going into freelance. We covered some great stuff in terms of photography, cameras, settings, how to shoot, lighting. It's probably stuff I'm missing, TK, but we covered a lot
All
of
sorts
ground.
of stuff. Yeah, we did. It was good.
Exactly. And then today we're focusing on what do you do when you've got your photo or your very likely many photos, and editing them and picking which one is right. What do you do once you've got those photos, and tackle some software stuff. So
yeah, for me this is sometimes the funnest part of the process, editing, like sometimes where you spend the most time as well, so it's an important part of the process, which go through lots of different things today, a few different styles, because obviously when you're editing, depending what you're editing, whether it's portrait, landscape, street photography, whatever it may be, obviously you can edit them totally different depending on the style as well. So we'll go through a few different ones. I've got a couple of different examples.
Yeah, great. Okay. So as we're going through today, if you have any questions, if you're over on YouTube or if you're on Behance, please let us know if you've got questions, because that's the great thing about being live. We can answer your questions specifically as we're rolling along. I'll do my very best to get to them as you throw them in chat. But enough from me. Should we jump into getting started with photo editing?
Yeah, let's get started.
Let's do it.
All right. So on Tuesday, we went through this. I just thought we'd refresh on it quickly because, or for anyone maybe who didn't join, because when we're editing, we should kind of take these things into consideration as well. So what makes a good photo is a combination of these three things, which I went through on Tuesday. So it's composition, having nice composition, having nice lighting, and having an interesting subject. These three things obviously all work together to make a photo that's pleasing to look at. So when we're editing, we can still kind of consider these three things. We can't change our composition too much, but obviously we can crop in and we can change our composition a little bit that way. Light is what we're going to spend a lot of time on. We're kind of, when you're editing, we can adjust the overall light. We can adjust light in specific areas, so we can really tackle this one. And then our subject. So I think when we're editing, we should always consider that we want to kind of draw the person's eye into our subject. We don't want to have too much distraction elsewhere. We really want to kind of draw the eye into the subject. So this is an important thing to consider when we're editing as well. Bit of a story. When I first started doing weddings, I remember I sent some edits to just a friend to say, oh, what do you think? What do you get some feedback? It's like, yeah, they're really nice, but the sky is a bit too much. Like it's not a landscape image, and you want more attention on the couple, you want the people.
Right.
So, and coming from someone who edits, originally I did a lot more landscape and stuff. That's probably why. And when you're photographing people and different things, you really want them to be the focus, obviously. So different things to consider about our subject when we're editing. All right. So before we open up Lightroom, three main things we're doing when we're editing. There's lots of other things we can do, like retouching and cropping and stuff, which don't cover these three, but these are what you'll generally spend your most of the time doing, which is the basic adjustments, where we'll go in and fix all the lighting and the overall exposure, everything like that. All our color adjustments, which is the next one, where we can tweak colors, fix colors, manipulate colors. And then lastly, I just broke this down into selective edits, where we might be applying like a radial filter to brighten up part of the image, not the rest. So these are the three things we'll kind of focus on and go through one by one. I think it helps having this, just so you know what you're doing and what you're trying to achieve in each process of your editing.
Yeah, that's great.
So these are the three, hopefully we'll have time to get through. And lastly, this is from a YouTube video. Again,
this looks like a YouTube tile, right? These do really well on YouTube. It's funny, isn't it?
I think this is my most watched YouTube video. So if you're unsure about which version of Lightroom is for you, you can go check it out. I won't spend too much time explaining the differences, but I am going to try and spend a little bit of time in both. So regardless of whether you're using Lightroom Classic or Lightroom, hopefully you can follow along. The thing with both of these, they're very similar. If you're unfamiliar, very similar in a lot of ways, but there is some differences as well. So
yeah, that's cool. And this is when you had the longer haircut as well.
Yeah, when I had the locks, which my wife didn't really like. So we'll see if that ever comes back. But
not likely.
Yeah.
It's going to be a thing of the past. But yeah, sorry, go on.
Right. So I guess the biggest difference before we jump in, Lightroom, just without the C, regular Lightroom is all cloud-based. This is the app we can use across pretty much all different devices, like our phone. It'll sync to our laptop, our tablet. We can edit on all these different devices. Lightroom Classic is just your desktop application. So this is the older, more original version of Lightroom. And this is still what I mostly use. And I think you've said to me a lot of people that come on still mostly use.
Yeah, we have it a lot on Adobe Live, and a lot of people that you know as well. Like I'm pretty sure Demis does. I'm pretty sure Pat K, I think Ben.
Yeah.
And every time they come on, they're like, yeah, cool, let's bust out Lightroom Classic. And I've often, particularly at the beginning, I'm like, why, we have this new fancy Lightroom. Why don't you guys use that? So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that. I won't jump in through there. But yes, I would think that everyone except for maybe, I'd say there's one or two people that we have on regularly that will use Lightroom. But the majority definitely use Lightroom Classic in my limited experience.
So the biggest difference, and probably why those people and myself you mentioned use Classic, is because we have too many photos, too many large photos that it's impossible to put on the cloud. That you can't actually get enough space to store all the photos I have. It's too much for the current storage. So Lightroom Classic's still the only option there for me in that regard. But if you shoot mobile, if you're shooting smaller size files, even if you have a lot of photos, but they're smaller size, like JPEGs, for instance, and you spend a lot of time editing on your phone, then Lightroom, regular Lightroom, is definitely the way to go. So that's where it has real advantages in terms of syncing across all devices. You don't have to have hard drives all over the place. It's all there on the cloud ready to go. So
right.
I'd like to jump over, but not at this stage with too many photos.
Yeah, understandable. All right.
All right, so let's open up Lightroom, shall we? And get started on some editing. So this is the first photo we're going to edit. And I think, again, let's start with, so that first thing we want to adjust the overall light or the exposure and play around with our basic adjustments, and also the tone curve can help us achieve that. Before we jump in, I might just show you, so all these different panels here we have in Lightroom, we can open them up. I like to have this solo mode selected. So if you right click, you can unclick that. It just leaves them all open unless you close them. So it just becomes a bit messy. So it just makes it a bit neater. I find you only can adjust one thing at one time. So I prefer just to have one open, just makes it a bit cleaner there. For those of you who aren't familiar with kind of Lightroom interface, we also have our histogram here. So this is really useful for giving us information on the overall exposure of the photo. This will tell us basically how bright we've got our darkest parts of the image on the left over to the lightest part of the image. So you can see how the histogram changes as we adjust the exposure.
Oh, wow. So it's like significant change just by doing that. Yeah.
This is, you can look at a histogram and tell whether a photo is exposed properly or not, or close to is a good exposure or not. And that's just space, that's pure science telling you how bright different parts of the image are, how dark different parts of the image are.
And that's cool. Really, you mentioned the science, because before in the previous stream we were talking about kind of the intersection between science and creativity. Was it creativity that you said?
Yeah,
I
so
think
science and art, but yeah, same thing kind of.
Yeah. So that's super cool.
So that feedback, obviously we can look at the image and kind of tell whether it's exposed, but having our histogram here is really useful because we can see like if our blacks are clipping, if it's too dark, or if your whites are clipping. Really useful to look at that every so often and see when you're editing. All right, so let's get started. The first thing I want to do is actually straighten this one. I usually do this before I start editing. It's just not quite straight to me, and Lightroom usually does a pretty good job, so I'm a bit happy with that. It's automatic. Lightroom's done all the work for me. I've just hit auto.
So what's it trying to straighten at that point? Like, do you ever click the button and it goes crazy, or is it trying to figure out where the horizon line is?
It'll use things like the horizons. You can see like a bit of a lean on Pat here. If I hit auto, it's straightened him up. So it depends what's in your frame, how well it will do. I'll go through in the next photo a couple of other ways you can straighten if it doesn't work, because you can use things like guided, where you might use your horizon or a building line and it will straighten it based on that kind of selection that you make as well. So there's lots of different ways.
Does that mean like when you're shooting, you're kind of willy-nilly about trying to get the horizon perfect or anything, or are you still trying to line it up as best you possibly can?
Yeah, I guess you're always still trying to, you're not trying to skew too much. You're trying
just wondering if you're just walking around just taking photos.
But sometimes you might find it's just a bit off for whatever reason. It might be straight, but it might not look straight. So you might need to skew it a little bit. So different reasons, but I guess you're usually trying to capture it as straight as possible.
Yep.
All right, so now that's straight. Again, I'm just going to show you, if unfamiliar, we've got this auto tool. This is basically, if I click that, it's going to try and adjust automatically the photo as best it can for it's using the algorithm. And usually, as you can see, it does an okay job. This is probably a bit too bright for my liking, but we can always use it as a starting point. So that's gone through and adjusted all our basic adjustments there. Because it is a bit bright, I'm just going to bring it back down, the overall exposure. I can bring down my shadows a bit, maybe bring those whites. And again, you can always see the changes here on the histogram as well. So now I'm a bit happy with that. And pretty much all I've done is obviously hit auto and then just tweaked it a little bit. So again, use Lightroom. Especially when you're new, it's really useful to get an idea of what Lightroom thinks would be a good adjustment and then go and adjust on top of that. So it's just a nice starting point. Sometimes you don't have to use it, but it can be useful.
Yeah, that's cool. And I just got a question around like shooting snow. Like snow would be very difficult. Like, is there anything particular that you have to think about with snow? I'm trying to remember years ago, I tried to take some photos in snow and I remember looking it up and you had to change like your white balance or something like that. There was some tips that happened. I don't think I tackled it successfully, but either everything was blown out or everything was gray, I think. So any advice in shooting with so much snow?
So white balance, I usually find in most conditions, it will, even shooting auto white balance, it will usually do an okay job. And it's something like this type of photo, we can always fix it in post if we need to. But in terms of exposure, especially if you're in middle of the day, the sun's quite high, very white snow, obviously it's going to be quite reflective. So you might find that quite a challenging situation to shoot in. So it might just be the time of day as well. But otherwise, yeah, just considering where the sun is, I guess, would be the main consideration. Yeah, because it might be a little bit more reflective than your usual landscape.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so we have basic adjustments and tone curve. These are the main ones that we're going to adjust to really affect the overall kind of exposure and brightness or darkness of a photo. Tone curve is a bit of a tricky one if you're getting started. It looks confusing, don't really know where to get started with it, but it's actually, once you understand the basics of it, it's pretty easy to follow. So it basically, like our histogram, represents our entire image. You can see the same shape here is kind of on this graph as well, but we have this line shooting through the middle. So this line is essentially our photo. We've got the darkest part of the image, blacks, shadows, midtones in the middle, coming up, highlights, and the very brightest part, the whites. So that's why if I bring the whole thing up here, it's going to be completely white.
Right.
Or if I bring the whole thing down, it's black. So this is our entire photo, essentially. We can adjust the brightness of any part of the photo just by clicking and adding in some points and then just bringing them up or down slightly.
Right. So you don't want to go too crazy with this, like you demonstrated just before. If you go too far, it's going to go nuts.
Too far, it's going to quickly ruin your photo.
Right.
And there is a way here to make really subtle adjustments as well with sliders if you're not confident using the points. So that's handy. You just click on this one to do that. But I'm going to come back to the curve and show you how we can just add a little bit of contrast into the image simply by, so this is our shadows, just by making those shadows a little bit darker, and just by making our highlights at the top here a little bit brighter. So by making some of the brighter parts brighter, the darker parts darker, obviously it just brings a bit more kind of contrast to the image.
Awesome.
So this is a typical kind of S curve. Sometimes it might be a bit heavier, and this is what a lot of people do on the tone curve. You don't have to use this, but just one thing we can do with the tone curve.
Nice.
Now, so I'm just going to adjust those highlights a little bit because it was looking a little bit flat to my eye, and I'm reasonably happy with where the overall exposure of this photo is at. We can see before, after. So I'm going to move on to color next.
All right, nice. So, is that so? Just on that, is that something you find yourself doing quite a lot, like making a change and then going back and forth and back and forth? Like, was that right? Like comparing the small subtle change you made?
Yeah, you might find you're going to make adjustments somewhere else, and you think, oh, okay, now I need to go and change something else slightly. And the thing with editing photos, especially in Lightroom, where you've got so many different options, you can achieve a very similar result going down many different pathways, especially with color that we're about to get. There's so many different color adjustments you can make, and you can not even touch some of them or use all of them and perhaps get a similar result. So that's the thing. You don't have to use all of them. You can, good to get an understanding of them and maybe see how you can use them and play around with them, and then decide what works for you and what you find easiest to achieve the result you want to achieve, because there is many different ways to often get there.
Right. Yep.
So let's look at color. So for adjusting color, we have so many different options. Firstly, we have white balance, and this is probably the best starting point. We want to make sure our overall white balance looks good. It doesn't look kind of too cool or too warm. So we want it to be what we think is kind of what the colors actually look like. So reasonably natural. If you want to get creative later on, you can come back to it, but I would suggest adjusting what looks natural to start with. We've also got tools we can use like Auto, which hasn't done a great job. I think I preferred how it was. Or we can use our Selector Tool. So this one, you're essentially picking in like target neutral. So you want like an area that you should expect to be white, like the snow here, and it will automatically adjust the white balance based on that selection you make. So that's really handy to use as well. Yeah. So Lightroom has all these features that really help us out. So if you know how to use them, it just makes your life a bit easier. But once you do that selection, you can also go and just make slight adjustments if you're not totally happy with it. It's still often a quicker way to get to your end result.
And so, colors like quite subjective, right? Like I from my experience with, our experience here on Adobe Live, having people on, like some people kind of like, oh, I went through like a blue period, everything was blue. Like I really like kind of tonally blue, and then kind of went away from that and maybe did things a little bit warmer or things like that. So is that like a stylistic choice that you think about, or do you try to get it as kind of true to the color? What are your thoughts around color in that sense?
Yeah, so for me, I'm usually editing to a style that I've kind of built over time, and I like. If you've seen some of my photos, it probably does have this kind of orange and blue feel throughout most of my editing. So often some of the colors might not be as realistic as other photographers, but this is a totally stylistic thing. It's totally up to you. And that's the beauty of photography. For things like product photography, fashion photography, where you're shooting garments that need to be the color they should be the color they're actually meant to be, it's a little bit more important. Same for portraits. We need to watch our skin tones. So things like landscape, street, I probably push a little bit more with the colors, whereas portraits maybe a little bit more natural, but still trying to put, I guess, my kind of touch on it in a way.
Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah. So color, where do we begin? We've talked about white balance. We've got vibrance and saturation, which is more just the kind of overall intensity of those colors. I'm just going to leave that there. We can come back to later on if we want to boost it up a bit. We've also got the tone curve. Past that, we've also got these colored curves where you can add in colors to different parts of your image as well. I might go through that in the next edit. This is a way where you can add a bit of a color cast to, again, like the shadows, midtones, highlights, different areas. And we've got like all these different colored curves here to do that. Color grading is another one. You can kind of achieve a similar result to what you can with those colored tone curve as well. So this is again where you can add in colors to your midtones, shadows, and highlights. You can pick whatever color you like. This used to be split toning, so it just used to be shadows and highlights. Now we've got heaps more options here, and even a global one, so I can put like a global kind of blue cast across the photo if I wanted to, or pick any color. So heaps of different options here. We also have like our HSL tab where we make all our individual color adjustments. And then our last one, which is camera calibration. So these are all the different ways we can play with color. We have so many different options. It's a bit overwhelming if you're new to photo editing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would imagine if you knew as well, like you'll be looking at them all thinking, I have to do something for all of these sliders, right? Like why else would they be here if I wasn't meant to tweak them? So but obviously that would become very redundant because they're all, you know, I mean...
in some ways there's obviously much overlap, and
overlap's a better word than redundant. Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of overlap, and I would imagine you could go through and just forever be going forward and backward, tweaking different things and just thinking, why is everything looking a bit weird? But it's great that you don't have to use everything.
No, you don't. And there's some that I don't often use depending on the edit, so it just depends.
Yeah.
So this last one, which camera calibration, this is pretty much the only tool that we'll go through today that isn't actually in the other version of Lightroom.
Okay, so this is just in Lightroom Classic. For those joining us, we're talking a little bit about the difference from Lightroom Classic and Lightroom. So this is something that's just in Lightroom Classic.
This is as I said, like only adjustment I think I'll go through today that we won't find over in the other version. And what it's essentially for, it's more of a technical thing. Its purpose was more to try and match to different cameras, to calibrate colors to different cameras. But we can also use it a bit creatively. So basically we've got red primary, green, and blue. And with these sliders, you can see if I bring that down, I'm just bringing my blues more to kind of a teal, which I just like that a little bit better there. It also changes the orange, complementary color there a little bit. And just by making subtle adjustments, again, if you're unsure on any of these, just go back and forth, see if it looks better one way or the other. Which the same with any of your sliders is a good way to learn what it does and see if you actually like it or don't like it, or you better just to leave it. So just going to make a couple of adjustments here, all pretty subtle. You can see if I turn, so these little switches, you can turn any of them off. This is just turning off calibration. We can see how it's changed mostly the blues, which is this adjustment here that I've made.
Right. So when you click that, it removes anything in that box, any of those changes to the image.
Yeah. So if I wanted to turn off that tone curve, I can turn that off there. You can turn on and off any of these if you decide, I don't like what I've done there. You can just turn it off if you want.
Cool. And it's non-destructive as well, I think, which is like super important thing that I think, all creatives, whenever you're dealing with software, you really want to try to you know, have that as part of your process, because if you need to go back, you're not kind of Command Zing back an hour, or, you know, throwing it out and going, I'm going to have to start again or something. Yeah, so working in this non-destructive way is such a time saver.
Yeah, and it's also useful, like if you're making adjustments along the way, you can turn it off and just make sure you're headed in the right direction. Make sure it looks better with those adjustments. You might, same way we often check out before, just to make sure you go in, it does look better than where you started and you're going in the right direction. So shortcut for that is just backspace. You can quickly see it before, tap it again, it will come back to where you're at. All right, so happy with that. The next thing I would do is jump into HSL, which is where we make these individual color adjustments. So basically we have hue for each of our colors, and this is where we can just shift our colors in either direction. Let's do blue because you'll see it more obviously. So we can shift our colors totally in either direction for each of our colors. Saturation, intensity of all of our colors, of course. And then luminance is probably the least understood one out of these three, but essentially this is how light reflects off a color. So again, let's do blue because it's obvious in this photo. You can see if I bring that up, it essentially kind of makes it brighter, but this is how it reflects light. So there's more light reflecting or less. So again, with luminance, you'll find if you make heavy adjustments, usually can be a bit destructive. So usually subtle adjustments here can have still a nice effect. So let's start with that. I'm just going to probably boost the luminance there in the blue in the sky a little bit. And let's just see on the orange how this looks by boosting it on the rocks. Just brings that up nicely a little bit as well.
And just silly question, but one that you know, I want to ask is, when you're talking about, it's choosing all these blues and it's changing them, it would choose all the blues in the entire image, right? Like anything on the blue spectrum, because nothing's selected or anything. It's the entire, the entire image. Yeah.
But the handy thing is, if you're like, if there's an area of the photo and it's a mix of colors, you're not sure exactly what the main color is, we have these selection tools as well. So if I click on this selection tool, anywhere I click, whatever colors make up those pixels where I've selected. So you can see this one's pretty much only blue. Aqua starts to change a little bit as I slide up and down. But say I pick here, it might grab more of a combination of colors. Again, it's mostly orange. But this is handy to adjust kind of multiple colors at once, or if you're not sure what the primary color is in that kind of area, which works really well with skin tone. So I'll show you in the portrait example how we can use that.
Yeah, cool.
So this one, I might just bring down the blue a little bit, just a little bit strong for my eye. And I'll just play around with orange. I might bring it out in these rocks just a little bit more.
And so as we're going through, I'll just, sorry to jump in there, but just chat as well as we're going through. Feel free to ask questions for those that have recently joined us. If you've got any questions while we're rolling along, don't hesitate to throw them in chat.
Yeah, jump in. So the hue on this one, because of those adjustments that I already made on calibration, I'm not going to do too much, but we can just check our blue, maybe bring that a little bit towards teal, and check our orange as well. I'm pretty happy where this is at with the overall color. So that's pretty much it for this photo in terms of color. And you can see I didn't touch color grading on this one. So we'll jump in that to the next one. And another example, again, that you don't have to use all of those color options, but they are there and good to know and experiment with.
Nice.
All right, so let's move on. The last thing I want to do for this photo is more our selective edits. So one thing I want to do is really increase this light behind the rock, make it kind of on our subject a little bit more. So the way I would do that is to come down with our mask, which is this one on the end, and I'm going to grab a radial gradient. So these used to be called radial filters. And these are probably, in my opinion, if you want to add in a little bit of light to your photo, because you can change the direction in any way, and it's a nice gradual application of those settings. So it's feathering at up to 100. You can change that, but I like 100 because it's going to be applying those settings as gradual as possible. It's going to look more natural, like actual light, as it kind of fades away as it gets further away from the source, obviously.
So it fades to like 0 pixels, right? Like it fades out so much that eventually once you get to the end, there's nothing there. Yeah.
You can see the overlay, how it's darker here and it gradually fades away.
Yeah.
If I bring up the exposure, you can see it's brighter up here and it's just gradually fading it down. So as I go and make adjustments here to increase the light, I've got increase my exposure. Now texture, clarity, dehaze, sometimes people get a bit confused about the difference, especially texture and clarity. These are things that are quite similar. Without getting too technical, I would say texture is, in my opinion, a little bit less destructive. So clarity, you'll see even again, looking at our histogram, if I change that.
Oh, wow.
Okay, let's go.
It's quite a big
difference. Changes it quite dramatically, even though it's just this part of the area photo we're working with, sorry. Whereas texture, you'll see it's not changing anywhere near as much. So clarity effects, it's basically adding in detail, as you can see. Yeah. Clarity adds it into the edges, contrast to our edges, whereas texture adds it into the areas that aren't edges or lines. So texture won't affect your fine details as much. Oh, they look like they basically give a similar result, but they are different. And I would say just be a little bit, so just watching this top area, if we push clarity, you can see how harsh it looks. If we bring it down, you can see how soft it looks. It just gets rid of or adds in a little bit of kind of contrast and detail to those edges. So when I'm adding in light, I like to reduce both of these because it gives that nice kind of soft look of light, and sometimes add in a little bit of haze. So the dehaze slider, basically, if we increase it, it kind of adds a bit of contrast and saturation back to your image, which is what we need when your image is really washed out. If we decrease it, you can see it kind of adds this kind of haze like a light would often give.
Yeah.
So now I have this nice light coming through, but the big problem here is that it's affecting this rock. So naturally, where I'm shooting this from, the light would not be coming from where I am. It would be coming from behind the rock. So we need to fix that. It just looks very unnatural. So really easy way to do this, we're going to, on our mask here, subtract, grab a brush, make sure we have auto mask ticked. So what auto mask does, it basically helps me to paint within the lines. So rather than just actually erasing where I'm clicking, it will try and find an edge and help me just stay within that edge. So it's really handy.
Right.
It means
a little bit like the magic wand tool, like
exactly.
when you're selecting stuff. Yeah.
So if I do this really quickly, see, I'm not being very careful, and it's pretty much finding the edge of the rock there for me. And then I can just make this bigger and go do the top bit of the rock. So if I didn't have that,
this is like coloring in for adults. This is good.
Yeah, this makes you, this auto mask makes you good at it, so you can do it quickly.
Even better.
You don't have to spend hours being super precise. It will largely, see, I'm going over, like I'm staying near the edge, but it's helping me find those edges. So now we have this mask. I'll turn off show overlay. Now we have this really nice light coming from behind the rock. I can move that to where I want, and it's not affecting the rock. So this is really handy. You can add in light anywhere you want and only affect part of the image essentially. So
that's cool. Like I would have expected to have to do that in Photoshop. I mean, I would do it in Photoshop because I know Photoshop better, but that you can do that just natively, like straight in Lightroom, and it was so quickly.
It was really easy. Like having, I think, hopefully a lot of people know, but that auto mask saves you so much time rather than having to do that really precisely, and it will give you a better result in the end as well because it's pretty good. Like it finds the edges pretty well.
You never know. Like, that's the thing. So often when we're doing Adobe Live, we'll be focusing, like, we'll spend 2 hours on like one specific thing, and then someone will just use a tool kind of willy-nilly, and then everyone will go, whoa, whoa, whoa. What did you just do? How did that work?
Yeah, what was that?
That was one for me. I wasn't aware of that one. I'm going to have to try it out.
Yeah, so that for me is really handy. We can do that with any of so there's so many different masking options. We can erase or add in different areas, whatever we like. You can add layers on layers to your mask. So these new masking tools are pretty amazing. Even like Select Sky, I'll just click it here to show you. There's kind of not much sky in this photo, and look how well it's found the area of the sky just from one click. So then we can go and make adjustments to just the sky, again, just from that one click. So these tools, this is kind of one of the big previous updates to Lightroom. You could do similar things before, but this just makes it so much easier. So again, there, let's just turn off to show you the difference those kind of mask layers have kind of made to the overall photo. So I'm pretty happy with this edit. I probably wouldn't do too much more. I'd possibly just put another radial filter in behind Pat here, and then just brighten it up just so he stands out a little bit more. And to make him stand out even more, again, I could come in and subtract, brush, and just brush out. I'll turn our overlay on so we can see where we're brushing. Again, I've got this turned on to help me. And if I just brush out Pat there, he's going to stand out even more because it'll be nice and bright behind him, but he's going to be nice and dark. Just create that contrast. Just going to do this very quickly so it's not super precise. And then just make sure it's not getting the rock there as well. And turn that off. So we can see there just how I've kind of brightened it up behind.
Yeah.
And he just, I don't know, it just stands out a bit more to me just from that little simple adjustment.
It's great.
So I'm pretty happy with that edit now. That's our before. That's our after.
Wow. Yeah, it's such a huge difference. It's lots of little steps, isn't it, to make that huge difference at the end?
Yeah, none of them were that complicated, but I guess playing, like, the more you play around with different things, you'll see what direction you want to take a photo, essentially.
Yeah.
Lastly, I would clean this up a little bit. So, like, these rocks are a little bit distracting here. We can use our spot removal tool just to, for simple adjustments, for simple removal like this, Lightroom is still doing a pretty good job. You can see I could clean up all of those. But this big one, I would probably have to come to Photoshop. Let's see what Lightroom does.
That was my question I had in my back pocket for when we got to the end of this, because when you showed this image it's kind of hasn't quite figured it out there, has it?
It hasn't. And I can move the area that it's sampling from, but it hasn't done a great job.
Yeah. So it's probably like a bit too big.
It's just too big. So for little things like those rocks, I could go through and clean up those, but this big one, not so much.
Yeah.
If you don't want to use Photoshop, another option is I could kind of crop this out. So there we've kind of got rid of that area that I just kind of mucked up.
Yep. And if you caught Tuesday's stream as well, we're talking about the rule of thirds. You just saw TK using that again, even through the crop, to keep in that spot.
And to change your crop overlays, so R is the shortcut to crop, and then once we're in crop, if you hit O, you can toggle through all these different overlays depending on where you want your subject to be. You might want them bang in the center.
How often do you use the Fibonacci spiral?
Rarely.
Yes, the answer is never. Yeah.
Yeah. But if you had like a spiral staircase or something, it would probably be like a really interesting composition.
Yeah.
It's usually not far off a third. Like you can see it, so like for me, I'd rather use a third.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I just think the Fibonacci spiral is like applied to things for no reason. Like a lot.
Like put it
You
wherever
see it a
we
lot in
can.
design. It's like, yeah, check out this. It almost matches the... Anyway, off my high horse.
Yeah.
That's cool. Letting you know we've got about 14, 15 minutes left. So if you did want to jump onto another one, oh, there we go. You're already ready to roll.
Yeah.
And
I
also
think
chat while we've got, 15 minutes while we've got TK here. Any questions, any comments? Let us know before we run
So
out
I'm
of time.
definitely not going to get to the third one. So let's run through this one pretty quickly. We're going to go transform again. Now, auto straightened it up pretty well, but just say it didn't. We've got options to do this manually. We can rotate it and then just click constraint crop to keep our edges there, or we can use guided. So this is where we would pick anything in the photo that we want to be straight, and you just need to have at least 2 points. So let's pick these 2 straight lines and it will automatically straighten it for you. So
oh, wow. That's cool.
When your auto fails, there is other options. Usually auto does a pretty good job, but not always. As we know, things aren't always perfect. So again, as a starting point, let's just hit auto just to see what Lightroom comes up with. And this one, it's not too bad, but I'm actually going to brighten it up even more. This is a nice, clean, white photo, so I want it nice and bright. And then just play around with my whites a little bit. So it keeps the brightness there, but it just flattens out those whites and highlights a bit. All right, so let's jump straight on to color with this one, because before we didn't spend much time on the tone curve with our colors or color grading. Now, for me, you can achieve kind of similar results with these because you can add in colors. So we've got obviously reds, cyan, green, magenta, blue, yellow. So whichever way we pull on our curve, it'll essentially add in that color. And you can do that again to like your shadows, the darker part, you can add in yellow, or the brighter part. I'll just reset that because we can do this in any of those colors. For this one, turn it back on, just go reset all. For this one, the overall image is a little bit warm. I want it to be a little bit cooler. So we could use our curves here to add in a little bit of cyan and blue. And you can see we've got a much cooler image there. Change the color by using those tone curves. If I turn it off, we can achieve a very similar result down in color grading. So whichever one you prefer, you can use both in combination, or you can play around with just one. So if we come into our midtones, you can pick any color and just add in whatever intensity you want. So I'm going to go quite subtle. For these kind of color casts, usually if you're correcting or adding in a color, I would go on the more subtle side. And you can just see which color you like. For this one, I'm trying to make it a little bit cooler. So I'm adding in a bit of blue again. And just to complement that, let's add in a little bit of orange to the highlights there.
So it's good to kind of understand your basic like color wheel sort of thing, complementary colors, secondary colors and things like that when you're editing, I think particularly tones and things.
Just because your complementary colors do often work well together. So it's good to understand that. So if I turn that off again, you can just see how it's just made it a little bit cooler overall. So this one, when we're editing portraits, we want to keep obviously skin tones quite natural. So I wouldn't usually tweak calibration too much, but I am just going to again bring those blues a little bit towards teal, and this one a little bit back to orange. So very subtle adjustments before jumping into our overall HSL adjustments as well. For this one, I have a nice clean image. Basically, I want everything desaturated except the skin tone. So I'm going to pull down all my colors in this one. And you can see just by those adjustments already how our subject just kind of stands out, because it's a nice clean image, nice clean kind of frame. If we just reduce those other colors, subject just stands out a little bit more. What I was talking about with these adjustments, if you want to make those fine adjustments to your skin tones, your selector tool can be really handy. This is where you click and drag up to change those colors in either directions.
So you click on like a part of the skin and drag up, is that?
Yeah, so you can click on any color. If you have this selector here on, wherever I click, so whatever pixel colors I click on, drag up, it will shift that one direction, drag down, it will shift it the other direction.
Right. So there's a little bit of invisible UI happening here. Like we actually can't see it there, but if you see it all the way on the right, you can see what up means right and down means left.
Once I click, it disappears. So that's why, and you have to hold it to make those. You can use it on saturation as well to just reduce your skin tones if they're looking a bit bright. So you click and hold and drag down.
That is cool.
You can see that it's mostly orange in these skin tones, but they'll vary depending on the color of the skin. So it's a little bit of red, mostly orange on this one, but it will vary. So I've just desaturated it a little bit everywhere. So I'm just going to boost the overall vibrance back and maybe a little bit of saturation. And I'm pretty happy with that. What I want to do is go one step further and reduce the color in the background even more. So I'm going to use our select subject, which usually does a pretty good job. And you can see it's largely selected the subject there. So again, these new masking tools in Lightroom are amazing. Most of the time they do a really good job. It's just missed this little area. So what I did there was invert, because I want to affect the area everywhere other than the subject in this photo. And then I'm just going to go add to tidy up this area. So add brush and just paint in that little area that it missed. So now I can desaturate my background. You can see there I've just reduced the saturation, how much the subject is really kind of standing out. I wouldn't do this in all images, but this one, because it's a nice clean kind of scene, it looks really nice by reducing the background colors. I can even reduce clarity, which we talked about earlier, and texture, just to give it that kind of dreamy look. But the great thing is it's not affecting the detail in the subject. So like I'm pretty happy with where this edit is at, just from doing those kind of few adjustments again.
Yeah, can you do the original and then this one again? That was pretty quick, but I just want everyone to be able to see that. So that's the before and that's the after. Yeah, wow.
How are we going for time? Because there's a few other portrait tips I could quickly touch on here.
Yeah, we've got like 6 minutes left or so before we get cut off.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think someone asked this on Tuesday, if the face was quite dark, we might want to grab, say, like a radial gradient. We could just pop that kind of over the darker area of the face and just increase the exposure there. So that's one way you can affect just that part of the photo. Another thing that's really handy for editing skin tones and working with skin tones is our brushes, because if I add in a brush just to the skin around the face, I'll quickly just paint that and make some adjustments. So here I don't want to get any of the features. I don't want to get obviously the eyes, nose, lips, any hair, anything, because what I'm going to do is just soften the skin. And this is something a lot of people would kind of do retouching and stuff in Photoshop, but there's so many different options in Lightroom as well. So if I bring down again clarity and more so texture on this hand, because it's a bit less destructive, you can see how it just softens the skin a little bit. So this can be, that's turned off. It's quite subtle, but it's, whoops.
Can you zoom in one more just to make sure we can see it? Yeah.
Yeah. So if I turn it off, you can see it just softens the skin a little bit more, but it keeps all the detail where we want the detail on the lips, the eyes and nose.
Nice.
So I think we're going to run out of time for me to jump over to this image and show you. I can quickly show the interface, I guess, if you're unfamiliar with Lightroom.
Yeah, we'll do 5 minutes in 5 minutes of Lightroom.
We'll do a speed edit so you can kind of
I won't ask questions. I'll let you just roll.
So I guess if anything, the interface on Lightroom versus Lightroom Classic is probably a little bit easier to follow. And I guess that's because it's newer and there's a little bit less going on. There's less features that it probably, if you're new to it, it's a little bit easier to grasp. So we even have light, color, different effects all gathered here in different sections. So again, light, we could hit auto, see how that does, and then make our own adjustments to just kind of fix that up a little bit. Come down to color and make some adjustments. So this one, maybe I'll push more towards teal. So you'll find all your color adjustments under one tab here rather than kind of spread out in different. So we have our white balance, intensities, color mix, and then the same color grading tool. So this one, I'm just going to boost the color. Let's play around with our color grading, maybe add some kind of aqua to shadows, midtones. Let's just go straight to highlights and add in kind of complementary color again. And I just want to show you quickly. So this is quite a foggy morning. Anytime you're working with fog or anything like that, or you want to add in some fog, even if there wasn't fog there. Again, this is just a mask. This is whoops. So this is a linear gradient. I just wanted to make sure because I don't use this version of Lightroom as much, called different thing, but a linear gradient it's still called. So we come down, it's going to apply those as gradually depending on how big your mask is.
Right.
To increase fog or add in fog to an image, we want to use our dehaze, but we want to go negative. So essentially adding haze, and you can see it's made it look way more foggy. We can like even make that nice and soft. We could brighten it up a little bit and it looks even more foggy than it originally did. Or even this light, we can kind of increase how that looks in the fog with a brush and do kind of a similar thing, but make it more kind of stand out a little bit more.
Oh yeah, that adds a lot, doesn't it? Like the idea of the light like being very kind of blurred out, but like fighting to get through the fog towards the audience. Yeah,
it gives us that look of natural fog, how light would kind of look. So all I've done there is some really quick adjustments, some same kind of masking tools we have in Lightroom Classic, and just zoom back out, kind of before and after, just with a really quick edit. So the interface, although slightly different, we've got largely the same options there, and some would argue it's a little bit easier to use as well.
Yeah, cool. That's really great. I think we're pretty much running out of time, ladies and gentlemen. Do you want to have a look at the very first one? Maybe we'll do a before and after, the second one before and after, and then we'll say our goodbyes, I think, because that'll probably take us. But I think it'd be great. So for anyone that missed the first edit, this is the after, obviously. Yep. And if we could check out the before.
There's before.
Yeah.
And
it's amazing. Such a huge difference.
Back to the after. Portrait one. That's the edit. And there's the before.
Amazing.
And this one back in Lightroom, before, after. Well, I didn't really get much time on that one, but
yeah, that was a speed. That was a speed edit.
Yeah.
We spent the first 25 minutes on that first one, so it's very polished. Probably not as polished as you normally do. Doing it live is very different, but it looks amazing to me. That will take us to the end. So where can people find more about you? You have a fantastic YouTube channel with lots of tips and advice as well.
Yeah, so especially a lot of photo editing stuff on my YouTube channel. I think that most of the videos that do best on my channel are all these kind of editing tutorials. So if you want to find more on YouTube, it's just TK North is my channel. And on Instagram, I post a lot of my photos as well, which is just TK_North.
Very good. I've shared those links in chat. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. And also if you joined us on Tuesday, if you missed any of it, it's all up on YouTube. So you can just follow along there, scrub back through, go through some of the steps that TK went through, some of the tools and things like that. And we hope that we helped you guys get started with photography, or, you know, brush us on some fundamentals, or maybe learn something you didn't know. There's tons of stuff in there I didn't know, but that's not saying anything. Thanks so much, TK. It's been so much fun hanging out with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks to everyone that joined. Hopefully, yeah, did find something useful from it.
I'm sure they did. Thanks, everyone. We'll be back next week. We're doing tips and tricks in photography and editing and things like that. Bit of Photoshop, bit of Lightroom as well. So if you enjoyed this, I'm sure you'll enjoy next week. Until then, we'll see you later. Thanks again, TK.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.